Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to our newest episode of Pop Culture Therapy. I am Cruellica Kain, and I'm here with...
I am back. It's Advent Nebula.
Yay! He's back with us!
Yeah, December was just one horrible month for me. Death of my grandmother, and my mother going through cancer treatment on top of that just has... Thankfully, my mother's cancer treatment just finished last week.
Yay!
Yeah, but she's still got to go to the doctor every week and make sure that it doesn't come back. But it's nice to actually be back, even though I now have a cold.
It is kind of the everything always coming at the same time. We never just get that easy, one thing happened here, then another thing happened here like months away, and then another thing. We all get it at the same time.
Yeah, it seems to fall that way. So, what we had decided that we're going to spend a lot of this month taking a look back at the previous decade. And we're going to look at movies, TV shows, anime, video games, Toku. Pretty much a whole encompass of just what our bests were.
And then, as a special surprise, early next month, we will look at what our worst was.
Now, our worst is not going to be a top 10. We're just going to go through from each category and just list what just stuck out to us as just the absolute worst of the past 10 years.
So we're going to keep this kind of fun and simple, well, as simple as we can be, and we're not really that good at being simple. But today we're going to look at our best movies of the past decade. And what, outside of what Kaiji Okami loves to argue, we're looking at the decade of the 2010s, from 2010 all the way out to 2019. So anything good that we personally enjoyed, and as I mentioned in the last podcast, I know Advent agrees with me, this is our personal list. This is not anything critically acclaimed. It may not match yours, sadly.
Exactly. And for a disclaimer on how I like to put things together, if a game, series, what have you, if it is one continuous story, but it's split across, like, say, 2 movies, multiple games, I end up bunching it together. Even if it's a long series that's split apart, I bunch it together if it's one continuous storyline.
I do the same myself as well, for the most part. Actually, a couple on a future podcast when it comes to TV shows is going to be like that for me. So, with movies, I was figuring we'll go with our number 10, and then we'll edge on down to what our favorite movies of the decade, or favorite movie of the decade was.
Yeah.
So what was your number 10 slot?
So, with my number 10 slot, going right in with horror starting as the It duology of chapters 1 and 2 put together. This was a masterful adaptation of the book. Yes, they did make some changes to fit with a movie style, and it worked. It really worked, and I was on the edge of my seat, and I have read the book. And they made some changes that I did not see coming, but worked extremely well with what they were telling in the movie form. And the way they turned Pennywise, just from what you have with the Tim Curry version, and making it with Bill Skarsgård, that's the creepiest monster I have seen in a horror movie in a long time.
So it is further on my list, but I will go on the reason why I love it later. My number 10, I actually have to say it's a weird number 10 for me, because I'm not a huge fan of this particular director, which is Wes Anderson. But when I saw the trailer for this movie, The Grand Budapest Hotel, I was like, okay, I can buy into this. This seems kooky enough that it could work, but it seems outside of Wes Anderson's normal shtick that I could handle it. So, Grand Budapest Hotel was one of my favorite movies of the decade, just because it took in so many elements of comedy, whodunit, as well as looking at how Wes Anderson views British nobility.
He does not have a favorable view on it at all.
No, he doesn't. And then Ralph Fiennes, who plays the titular character of the Grand Budapest Hotel, running it and everything. His character, when you think of him versus Voldemort,
or even in Bond as M,
it's so different, and he does such a great job with it. And the visuals are beautiful. The character representations are excellent. So if you've not heard of the movie or have not seen the movie, I would definitely recommend it. And if you want to try getting into something that Wes Anderson has done, it, at least for me, is a great starting point.
It is. So for my number 9, horror again. But this also, if you remember our top horror movie podcast from a few months back, was my choice, and it's one of the most recent horror movies too, because of the way it sets things up so early, and then the tension that just drives through the rest of the movie. And that's A Quiet Place. I really, really like this original IP, and I really was a little bit curious to see how a comedian like John Krasinski would act and direct a horror film. Well, he's proven himself, and we get a sequel later this year, which is continuing directly from where the last film ended. So I'm very curious to see where he takes this, and considering he's back in charge of writing and directing, even though he's not starring in the movie this time, it's going to be very curious to see how this continues, because I have a very good outlook on where they're going with this.
I do. It's not on my list, but that was a hard decision to make not to put it on my list. It was such a great movie. My number 9 pick is Black Klansman. For multiple reasons. One, the story, since I've heard of the story multiple times, it was an awesome interpretation of real life events, even though they did take some Hollywood liberalities of how they presented certain things.
And how David Duke was presented.
Yes, but I will have to say Topher Grace looked eerily exactly like David Duke back in the 70s. And I also, for this particular movie, the acting was incredible. Adam Driver, Denzel Washington's son, now I'm forgetting his first name, and it's terrible. And it's going to come to me right after we're done with the podcast. But everyone did a fantastic job in this movie with acting, with presentation, with the storytelling. And I also thought it was very important to see how real to life, even the events that take place in Black Klansman, are real to this day and age. And how, sadly, not much has changed.
No, a lot has not changed. And being a resident and a native of Colorado, it's a story that is talked about because it happened in Colorado Springs in the late 70s. So it's ingrained in Colorado history. And the Klan goes back to the 1920s here in this state. So this was at the tail end before the Klan officially pretty much got weeded out of politics in the entire state of Colorado in the late 70s.
Which is always a good thing in my opinion. You should not have hate groups of any sort running any type of political arena. So, on a happier note, or hopefully a happier note, or horror-related happier note, one doesn't know, what is your number 8 pick?
So, my number 8 pick is the only anime film in my top 10 movies of the decade. And it's one that, if you like sci-fi, that kind of is a little bit on the trippier side, and also has a really engaging love story, Your Name is one movie that just blew me away when I first watched it through a internet fan sub before it actually got an official release here in the US. Because there was a time where it was in a limbo spot where nobody knew if it was going to end up actually getting an American release. But I've seen it 4 times now since it came out, and every time I am just in awe and just love this movie. Because it talks about fate and just that you never know what fate's going to hold in store for you, but you can also change fate at the same time.
Oh, it's such a great movie. I saw it in theaters with Kaijin Okami, and I was actually surprised at how much he enjoyed it, being that it did have that strong love story aspect to it. But it was such a beautiful film, and it was well animated, well paced, and a great story altogether. My number 8 pick, because apparently my list is a combination of whodunits and horror, which I'll be getting to horror soon, is Nice Guys. This was a great film with Russell Crowe, Ryan Gosling, and it is that old Private Dick or Private Eye type story where you have two investigators trying to take on this crime in the mid-70s, because apparently that's a popular decade in this decade. And it was such a great film, and I've not been a huge fan of Ryan Gosling, mainly because he's always done the rom-coms, and that's just not my shtick. But in this film, because he did this around the same time he also did La La Land and a couple of other films, he really put himself in the element, and you could actually feel that he was this bumbling private investigator when you have Russell Crowe's character, who is like this really hard-ass, balls-to-the-wall investigator that the first time they meet, Russell Crowe breaks his arm.
Nice Guys is one film that I still have yet to get a chance to see.
You need to see it. We are going to fix this soon because it's such a good movie. It's so fun. And I actually think it's kind of what really spurred on a few of the other similar films that came out afterwards.
Well, Logan Lucky probably would be one of the prime examples of that.
Well, you had Logan Lucky, Inherent Vice. There's so many other films that came out afterwards that may not have been exactly inspired by Nice Guys. It really did have those elements.
They took some of the elements.
So what is your number 7?
My number 7 is, and we were talking about Ryan Gosling, but is a sequel to a film that nobody ever thought would happen, and then this one actually came out on my birthday the year it came out, and it's Blade Runner 2049.
It was a different movie.
Yeah, it's a different, but I was very impressed with this one, that they could actually make a sequel to a phenomenal cult classic film and do it so well and actually feel like it's carrying on from the previous movie. Yes, this is a long movie. It is almost 3 hours long.
Yes.
But it works because of the way it's built up. It's a slow burner, just like the original Blade Runner was, leading to the climax, and Jared Leto plays probably one of his best villain roles I've seen him do in a long time.
He did. I was actually going to mention that. Jared Leto, along with Ryan Gosling, were, well, and Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
All three of them did phenomenal roles of really, for Harrison Ford, kind of remembering what made Blade Runner such a good film, and then bringing in Ryan Gosling's character and how that story plays out, and Jared Leto's story, how that plays out in the film. It was so great.
Yeah, and Gosling's character, I don't want to spoil what his character is, but you're left asking, is he human or a replicant for a good first half hour of the movie before you actually find out the actual answer.
And even then, I've seen the movie a couple times, and I still don't know all the answers that they ask, but it's kind of meant to be that
just
way.
like the original Blade Runner had all those questions that you're going to ask, but you're never going to get the answer to either.
And so, funny enough, my number 7 pick actually is also about machines, or the ghosts in the machine, so to speak. My 7 pick is Ex Machina.
That is actually higher on my list.
I kind of figured. This is actually a very, my opinion, it's a very romantic horror film. And I know some people may say it's true science fiction or it's hard science fiction. I have always, when I watch this movie, look at it as a horror film because there is a lot of sci-fi horror. Their Thing really established that, in my opinion, even though there's many well before that. But how I take this as a horror is because whereas sci-fi gives you a lot of the answers and makes you play around with it like Blade Runner does, Ex Machina, you have to question everything from the start of the film. Is there really answering the question that we all heard from Ghost in the Shell? Are there ghosts in the machine? Can somebody actually gain, or can a machine gain sentience by being around a human? Can a human become more than a human? Oh God, I feel like I'm referencing White Zombie now. But, and thank you, Rob Zombie, for that. But is there something more human than human? And this is a beautiful film where that's the romantic horror for me of playing around with your expectations. And I know you'll talk about it later, so I won't go into too much. But I personally love this film because it really made you think of what is right and what is wrong for machines, as well as how the relationships between human and machine need to play out. Are we getting too far ahead of ourselves?
So, for my number 6 is the first of the Marvel films that I have on this list.
I actually worked hard not to put any because I knew you would.
But, and here's the thing. When you're looking at the Marvel films, the Captain America movies were the strongest of all the MCU films we've had over the past 10 years. And Captain America Civil War really built on what the previous had established, plus what the previous other MCU movies had established up to that point, and showed that there was a rift and a breaking point before then. And after the letdown that was Avengers Age of Ultron, this was a nice refresher to come see along and just build up back to where we remembered these characters were at, but also keeping in with that connected storyline. And the Russo brothers just seemed to know what they were doing and continue to do just later on.
I will agree with that. If I had put a Marvel movie on my list, this is the one I most assuredly would have put. Kaiju would have put Winter Soldier, because that's by far his favorite. But Civil War was a great film, and I think, like you said, the Captain America series itself has the best stories, because the Russo brothers knew exactly what they were doing every single time they took up Captain America's mantle.
And especially when they held the Avengers movies, too.
Oh, absolutely. No, they proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt, they know and love the source material and what the franchise is meant to be. So my number 6 is, if we count Ex Machina as not technical horror, my number 6 would be true horror. And this is by a new director. And the movie is called The Witch. I love this movie from the start because it was so isolated. And it really looked at what America was like during the times, even before the Salem witch trials. Because the movie takes place, I think, early on when the American settlers were there.
It's basically the Pilgrims had only been in America for about 20 years when this film's taking place.
So this is still English-owned America. You had the Pilgrims here, and they still did not know what to do, because where England, Scotland, Ireland have all of this dynamic, you're in a complete wilderness, isolated from everything you knew, everything you love. And the movie starts out with this one family who is devout, just like everyone else, being excommunicated from the village because they weren't devout enough.
Which, if you know Puritan history, happened quite often.
Oh, yeah, because it's the reason why the Salem witch trials even existed, because the Puritans are insane, which are many of our forefathers, but still that's not the point. So I love this movie because it is isolated, and you're witnessing it from the view of the eldest daughter, who cannot do anything right by her mother, is coddled on by her father because of the fact that the mother is so strict and mean towards the daughter. And then you do have all of these elements, like What is Satan? What is the devil? Is the devil truthfully in the vein of the goat, which many Puritans believed that goats were a symbol of the devil. That's why you have the devil always appear with the cloven hooves and the horns.
And this movie is one of those that you can see the director had a very complete vision in mind for a psychological horror film.
Oh, yes. No, it really plays with you, and once you get to the end, you still don't know what to think of. What is right, what is wrong. And I personally recommend it to anyone who is interested in seeing a horror movie that's done in a dialect that's not even spoken any longer in the world.
Yeah, and this is one I'm really curious to see where the director goes, because he has a new horror movie coming out later this year.
Yes, I am very, very eager myself as well. So what is your number 5?
So my number 5 is the only Bond movie that I could really say out of the two that we got this decade that I enjoyed. Skyfall.
Okay, that was a very good movie.
I mean, this kind of broke the mold of what we've had on Bond movies for a while. And really, not since License to Kill had you had a kind of a out of sync storytelling for a Bond film. Because in a way, it's a revenge tale for Bond again. And you hadn't really had that since License to Kill.
And that's a good point, because License to Kill, if you haven't seen that, that's the one with Timothy Dalton. I think it's his second, Dalton's second. That is the perfect example of what a revenge story should be.
Yes, it is. And then this one builds up with that. And you're also seeing what's going to be coming later on. Because with the current Bond films, there was an overarching story for all of them. Mm-hmm. And this one kind of can be held on its own without having to see the other films with the overarching story. Because it's laying the groundwork that you don't see there, but also going into Bond's past at the same time. And Daniel Craig, as much as he is not like doing the Bond films, he put his all into this one.
Well, and the one thing I like about Skyfall is it doesn't show Bond as clearly the debonair hero. He is really taken out of his element, which I think is what Timothy Dalton did a fantastic job for as Bond as well, is taking out of that element of not being the Sean Connery or Roger Moore versions of a debonair dandy James Bond.
Yeah, the Dalton and Craig have been the two most relatable to the book versions of Bond, because Bond is an asshole womanizer. And these two both have excelled at it. But there's people that have only ever done the films, is why they don't really care for Dalton or Craig's Bond, where I actually think they're the two best representations of what Bond is.
As much as I love Sean Connery as Bond, and love Sean Connery as an actor, he's always been an incredible actor, is he really did ruin people for what they interpret Bond as. Because one thing I heard from Kaiji Okami, he also verified it, is that one of the representations of Bond's appearance and Bond's attitude was actually John Pertwee, who was the third Doctor. So I thought that was kind of interesting, because if you look at his characterization, he would make, in our movie universe, a terrible Bond. Yeah. But to think of him as an interpretation of what Bond is supposed to look like and be, it's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah, it actually is really fascinating. It really makes sense when you think about how the book representation of Bond actually is.
Oh, exactly. So my number 5 pick is also a revival of an old IP. Especially because the third movie in this old IP was so silly. It wasn't the worst movie ever. Thunderdome was by no means the worst Mad Max film in existence.
It's meme to hell.
Oh, it's meme to hell. But we had Fury Road. So one, we got introduced to a brand new Mad Max, since obviously, one, Mel Gibson is way too old to play the character, and two, he's way too lost in his head to play the character any longer. So we got Tom Hardy, who did a fantastic job of not only encompassing how Mel Gibson was in the earlier films, but also giving his own take. He very much resembled Mad Max from the first film.
Yeah, in a way, George Romero's never said where this takes place in the timeline of Mad Max, but this movie feels like it would be directly after The Road Warrior before Beyond Thunderdome.
Oh, absolutely agree with that. And it was also great because unlike with Blade Runner, which is not a disservice to them because it wasn't possible, but this film, you actually did have the original director who created the franchise, who created the character, who created the story, actually helm the revival of the story.
And only 2 scenes in the movie involve CGI. Everything else is practical effects.
And that, once again, is why it's probably my favorite film of the decade just because of practical effects. It's my number 5 pick because there's so many more. But for the fact that if you haven't seen the movie, I would definitely recommend it because the nice thing is you don't have to see the previous entries to enjoy this. Because they make it where you can walk in no matter what you have seen and still understand and enjoy. But everything that you see, especially the guitar that shoots 50 feet of flames, which is by far my favorite scene of the movie, is all real. They actually have a making of video where they show how they're doing all of that.
And they put the HBO special on the Blu-ray. It's an hour-long special just talking about the special effects that they did for this movie.
So I was very happy to see that, and I'm actually eager to see what we have next for the next Mad Max, since I know it's being talked about. And I believe Charlize Theron is going to be reprising her role along with Tom Hardy.
Yep. It's just a matter of scheduling if they can actually get it done.
I have faith if they wanted to, they could, because everyone appeared to have fun while they were doing it.
So my number 4 is what you already had previous on your list, with Ex Machina, which it's a cyberpunk noir, as I like to describe this movie, and the tension between the actors, because there's only 3 actors in this whole movie. And I kind of like to call it a closed room storytelling, because it really is. And it's interaction between a human, the creator, and the machine. Is the machine actually gaining a soul? It asks so many questions that you have in this movie that a lot of your traditional cyberpunk asks, but at the same time, it also is a love story. It's a thriller. It's a suspense. It's so many genres wrapped into one. And this was the director's debut movie.
Oh, yes, which always surprised me. Because just like with The Wish, which was also a debut movie, this one took so much more effort as well.
Which, when he came out with Annihilation, which was an adaptation of a book trilogy, and just ruined that.
Oh, I know.
Kind of makes me wonder, was this just lightning in a bottle? But we'll know, because he's got another movie coming out next year, whether or not that Ex Machina was kind of a fluke for him, and he just ended up striking with the right script that he wrote and got the right actors in together.
Well, yes, and the one thing I didn't mention before is I really love the fact that it actually almost slapped Asimov's rules in the face.
That's the thing. It pretty much did. And there's a extra on the Blu-ray with the director where he decided not to follow Asimov's rules at all with this. And he kind of created his own because of what we had. He was talking with modern tech people on how they code nowadays. A lot of coders realize that they cannot code properly with the restrictions Asimov's rules had put in place.
And it will make me curious as we go further into the future, what will be the new rules of how man and machine will interact.
Yeah, because Asimov set that, but now people that do coding don't want to follow it anymore.
So my number 4 pick is actually a horror movie that had all the potential to be incredibly terrible. And it's kind of funny because now it's so memed because of the titular character, the Babadook.
Oh, yes.
Which always makes me surprised with the whole gay pride thing with the Babadook and Pennywise. Because I'm like, you do know that Pennywise in the book is actually a female. But outside of that, I love the Babadook because it actually, in my opinion, goes back to what made horror excellent. You have elements of mental illness. You have elements of personal and emotional struggle. You have elements of the supernatural. You have elements of wondering, is it all in their head? Because it's so much wrapped up into each other that it really takes the whole element of psychological horror and reminds you of what was popular in the 50s and 60s, especially with all the stuff Vincent Price did. What was popular later on when you got into The Exorcist. And then when you played with Psycho, which was before, I'm reversing, but still, when you get to all those movies, up until Scream, essentially, that always played with different elements of your head that we lost for about the last 10 years.
And for me, it was this, The Conjuring, and Insidious that kind of revived horror again that we've got now.
It was, and I will 100% agree with that, because the reason I didn't put Insidious or The Conjuring films on here, or anything in related to that, is because I had to figure out which one really resonated with the old school aspect, and that was the Babadook. The other movie that would really put that revived horror that did the supernatural that I almost put instead was It Follows. But the Babadook, if I wish this book was real, because I would love to read the Babadook book, but just how the character is represented, how the family handles it, well, especially the mother, and like horror movies in the past, there is no happy ending.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I love that has been revived with this movie, with Conjuring, with It Follows, is that there is no, it's done and it's gone. Because you still have to live with the repercussions of whatever happened.
And I like how the director said there will never be a sequel to this movie because he only intended it to be a one-off shot. And one thing I really found surprising is that Australian horror movie actually made waves across the planet. But we can thank Netflix for being the ones that had the balls to license this for international.
Absolutely, because if not for Netflix, we would have not gotten this film. We would have not gotten other horror movies like What's in the Tall Grass or Veronica or so much more. So,
Hush, which is a really excellent horror movie.
Oh, yes. And if not for Netflix starting with the Babadook, which is another reason why it's also in top 10 of my favorite movies of the decade, because it stands for so much, as it doesn't have to be a big blockbuster. It could be very simplistic in its narrative, which is what horror has always supposed to have been, and it can still meet its goals.
And on to my number 3, and this is where I said the rules, where if it's one continuous story told over multiple parts, comes into play again. And that's what the Avengers, Infinity War, and Endgame movies together is one. And I'm like, yes, I know, I'm going to be sitting down for 6 hours if I decide to watch this all in one go, but to me, Marvel fan, worth it. And this was a payoff that just worked, because there was a lot of fear people had going in. Were they going to be able to pay this off, especially after how Infinity War ended into Endgame, which the Russo brothers, true to how they've been since they started with Captain America Civil War, just kept on keeping with the tight scripts, and it's a credit to them, it's a credit to Kevin Feige, it's a credit to every one of the actors that have committed these movies for the last 10 or so years.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is not on my list. The whole build-up of the story, the whole execution of Infinity War and Endgame were fantastic, because there were so many little nuggets and Easter eggs and elements that had to play a part in all the other movies to also make it work. But you had to have the Russos look for those Easter eggs of how they're going to put it into the main story and make it make sense, work, have fun, and still give homage to the hardcore Marvel fans that know the source material, that know the comics that a lot of these elements are based off of. Because I think the reason I probably didn't put it on my list is because I feel like I need to go to therapy. With Advent, with Kaiju Okami, with Chrysalid, with Silver Quill, all of you guys knowing the source material and the comics and the random ass characters. I think I have to go to therapy because I know more about these characters' personal lives than I ever thought I would know for a human being.
Alrighty, on to your number 2.
3.
3, yeah.
So my number 3 is actually the It anthology or duology or however you want to call it, the 2 It movies. The reason why I have it higher on my list is because it was always one of those stories that always screwed with me. I read the book as a kid, probably much younger than I should have, having reread it again, thinking about it. I watched the original miniseries way too young, which is what inspired my deadly fear of clowns for many years. But also my love of horror. Tim Curry did a great job as Pennywise, and when I heard originally that they were going to be remaking the film for a modern era, I was very, very afraid because while I wouldn't say that the It miniseries was like the pinnacle of great storytelling, it still was all that we ever had to talk about the movie and to talk about Pennywise the Clown and everything that went into it. And when Bill Skarsgård was first pictured in the trailer as Pennywise, I'm like, okay, this has some hope. Then we watched them. It was fantastic. And I'm not going to go into too much detail since you had already done so, but also just to focus on the fact that you had a lot of great characters, especially the child actors, because this film really hinges on how well they do as actors and actresses for Bev's particular character.
And what was really nice that led in, they had the children actors actually interact with the adult actors cast as them so they could actually get the mannerisms together. So it would feel like this was a natural progression as they grew up. And when you look at the adult side, Bill Hader was probably the standout of all of them.
Well, him and McAvoy both looked like adult versions. Actually, they all looked like adult versions of their child counterparts, especially Jessica Chastain, which is kind of hard because men don't change as dramatically. When women, as we grow because of puberty and things like that for women, we can change dramatically. I look nothing like my childhood counterpart, and I have not had work done. So it's normal to see that progression where I've seen pictures of yourself, and same with the kaiju, and you look pretty much the same, just older.
Yeah, I just have a beard now. It's the biggest difference.
Exactly. So it's always fascinating when you see that, and it was just such a great film and films because when you had the sequel, it was just great to finally see what you loved in the book on screen, as well as just having almost damn near perfect horror movie. And
actually being able to adapt parts of the book that they could never have done back in the 90s.
Oh, no. And quite happy they didn't adapt certain things, admittedly, but 100% agree with you. So what is your number 2?
My number 2 is what would probably be Kaiji's number 2 or number 1 if he actually put together a list of this, and that's Captain America Winter Soldier. Which, spy thrillers, like Kaiju, I enjoy them a lot, and this was what happens when you put a spy thriller into the MCU, and it was also kind of a good introduction to just what Natasha was as well, with her as Black Widow, which kind of sad that we're just now getting a Black Widow film at this point this year.
It is kind of a slap in the face that a lot of the female heroes don't get as much because they always make that comment, well, they won't bring in as much ticket sales. How do you know without trying?
And then Wonder Woman came out and just showed that maybe you should.
Exactly.
But there's not a lot I can't say that Kaiju's kind of talked about several times. throughout the last 5 years of the channel about this, because I'd be pretty much reiterating what he said about the film.
Absolutely. But no, it's an incredible film, and it is a perfect spy thriller.
Yeah.
So my number 2 pick is Logan Lucky. Amazingly enough, not enough people have seen this film. And it frustrates me.
And the thing with this film is it did make a profit for a late August film release.
Absolutely. So this film is a perfect example of a crime comedy. Can't say crime drama because it is by no means dramatic. And it stars Channing Tatum, which really surprises me because I don't think of him as that great of a actor to take on more serious roles, even though he did a good job in Hateful Eight.
Adam
Driver, which once again proves that he's a kick-ass actor, and Daniel Craig.
And Daniel Craig pulling off the perfect West Virginia accent.
Oh my God, he plays the perfect West Virginian good old boy. And if you don't know what good old boy means, it's probably an older term, and sadly I was raised around terrible people, for a white redneck. And that doesn't mean it's a good thing, but it's an older white redneck who just basically stays within the same vein that he always does.
And then the 2 actors that got cast to play his brothers were probably the highlight of the movie.
But this movie, I will never spoil it because I want everyone to see it because I think it's an incredible film. But everything that you think happens, you go through this process, you watch them do the crime, and then the movie just switches and does everything else differently. And you're like, wait, what? How? Who? Huh?
And if you ever want to see Seth MacFarlane playing himself, basically.
Oh, we actually got Silver Quill to watch this movie a few months back, and he had no interest in this movie. And now he actually has the movie because he wants to use so many of the clips, especially of Daniel Craig's, to use for, like, memes for future videos. And it's hilarious.
Yeah, there's one sequence in the movie, you're just like, wait, he's that intelligent?
No, there's one sequence in this movie where there's a prison riot. And one of the demands is to get the
latest books of Game of Thrones out.
And just, it's so funny how they handle it because the way they do it is perfect. So with that said, what is your number 1 pick?
So my number 1 pick was the movie I have watched over and over again, more than any of them, and you already had it on your list, and that's Mad Max Fury Road.
I love this movie.
Yeah, I don't think I have a movie in my collection that's come out over the last 10 years that I have watched more than this one. I've probably watched it 8 or 9 times just because it's that enjoyable of a movie. It's not deep in plot. It's excellent special effects, and it's a movie you can just have on the background while you're doing something else and just flat out enjoy. The acting is on top of its game with Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy. And for Tom Hardy only having about 45 lines through the entire movie.
I know, because most of it is grunting.
It just pulls off what Mad Max would be like post Road Warrior after the shit that happened to him in that movie.
Oh, absolutely. And if you haven't seen the previous entries into the Mad Max films, they are incredible. What was done by Romero along with what was done by Mel Gibson, because Mel Gibson was unknown when he was doing these films. It was not like Tom Hardy where he was a well-known actor. So he had to this is basically Mad Max, the original series, is what proved that Mel Gibson could be a good actor, whereas this proved that Tom Hardy is an excellent actor.
Yeah. And really, with the start of the film, if you watched Road Warrior and you watch watch Mad Max, the second one, you just goes like, this could be right there, just taking off right afterwards. And it's almost like you're going into Beyond Thunderdome right after the movie ends on this one.
Oh, absolutely. No, the way it's done, oh my God, I can't wait for the next entry. So my number one pick, I actually had to laugh when you were talking about a comedian writing a horror movie. Because my number one pick is also a comedian writing a horror movie. Which I honestly thought would never work because he's such a great comedian, and that's Jordan Peele. One, I just saw a picture of it, so I'm going to remind everyone, if you've not seen Key and Peele's movie Keanu, you need to see it because it's the most adorable film in the world. That is not my number one pick, I promise you, but watching the calendar pictures for the kitten Keanu, perfect. My number one film is Get Out. It was hard to go between Get Out and Us because they're both great horror movies, both written and directed by Jordan Peele. The reason why I went with Get Out is because just like A Quiet Place was with Krasinski, you don't know what to think when you're so used to what this particular person has done in a completely different genre. While horror and comedy, which we've talked about during our horror movie podcast, can work together very, very well, Get Out is not by any means a comedy.
It's just a social commentary.
It's a social commentary horror movie. It is actually quite frightening in how they handle it because it's completely 100% a psychological horror film. And when you think about it, of how the characters get into this, why the certain situations and certain actions were done the way they were, there is no right nor wrong answer, and it's deplorable, not on this whole racial or social commentary divide, but just because they're human beings doing deplorable ass things. But this horror movie makes you think, as well as, like with Mad Max, I have watched this movie so many times because it's just something that you can easily watch and you don't have to think, because the perfect movie, in my opinion, at times does the thinking for you, but not to the point where it leaves you out of it. It doesn't disregard or make you feel stupid. It just gives you the chance where you can truly enjoy it.
Yeah, this is an enjoyable horror movie as well, and it would probably be number 12 on my list if we were doing a top 20. It is that close to making it into my top 10 films because of its social commentary on race relation, eugenics, and just how we are as human beings in this current political climate that we've kind of had build up over the last 30, 40 years.
And it also, what I loved about the horror element is it really played with the aspects of manipulation.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a great element in psychological horror, is how can you manipulate your main character as well as the audience on this journey. And it was well written, well paced, and well thought out. And it's something that we need more of, and I'm really excited and eager to see what else Jordan Peele does.
Yeah, with the Candyman movie being his next, I'm really curious to see, because he said it's not a reboot, it is a sequel. So I'm kind of curious to see what him and Tony Todd are going to be doing with this Candyman movie.
I know, I'm so eager. Candyman, if you've never seen it, is a great horror movie. A little disgusting because of
if you're
all the
afraid
bees.
and they're real bees and they are bringing back real bees again,
that's going to be hard because
Tony Todd has it in his contract again. He gets $1,000 for every bee sting.
And trust me, first movie he got ton. But that is pretty much it for our top movies of the decade. And it's hard, like you said, to have just simply 10 because unlike the prior decade from 2000 to 2009, I felt that this decade kind of remembered that the moviegoer wants to be a part of the experience. The prior decade forgot about us.
Sorry, there are F-16s going overhead if you're catching that. But exactly, this... And I think it's because of the way that streaming has become so big in there that theaters have upped their game so people can actually go in there and have an experience with these films, and that's what they're getting at now. And streaming's going to become bigger as this next decade goes on, and you're probably going to have more of these event movies come out now, and it's going to be very curious to see if it stifles or encourages growth and creation in filmmaking over the next 10 years.
But the other thing that I think that was well noted from both of our lists, and I think this is important for every viewer in the realm of pop culture for movies, is it does not have to be a gigantic blockbuster. It can be made on a lower budget. I know Get Out and The Witch and a few other movies on my list and a few of the movies on your list.
A Quiet Place was made on a very small budget.
They were made on small budgets. They were not made just with big names. They were not made with big thrills and chills and in-your-face situations. They were made by unknowns or someone who is doing it as a love letter for something that they have passion for. And they prove that you don't have to be the big blockbusters. Big blockbusters are great.
Yeah, and on our list, Ex Machina, which was on both our lists, was the film that had the smallest budget out of everything we had on our list.
Oh, yeah, which is very surprising because when you watch the movie, it's sci-fi. And even though it's horror, or if it's cyberpunk, or if it's a noir, it still has the sci-fi element of a machine. And you cannot make machines cheap.
And the makeup job that they did on this movie, I am surprised it lost Best Makeup when it was up for an Oscar.
I know, I think, who did it lose to? But no, it still lost Best Makeup, whereas Suicide Squad won Best Makeup.
That was the year. It was Suicide Squad's year. That's right.
Suicide Squad can win, but Ex Machina and so many other films can't. Still makes no sense. But I will not get into that. We'll save that for a future podcast.
Yeah.
But on that note, bye!